Hello, we're still in Acts chapter 21. We're looking at verses 27 through 36 today. Um, as we do that, got just kind of a couple questions to sort of kind of get us going with all this. You remember, or probably have played the game Monopoly, and at some point in Monopoly, someone's going to draw a card in there that's a get out of jail free card. Well, when we read in Acts 21 about Paul and his kind of mission that he's on and sort of his life circumstance, he actually gets a get into jail free card here, and a lot of crazy things that are happening with this. But there is a word that's going to show up in your text as you read this today that you may not know is the same word being used over and over and over again. But I want to read a couple of these things. The same word that's being that's being translated into these. In verse 27, we read the word the whole crowd. In verse 30, we read the people running together. In verse 34, we read the crowd. And then a little bit later on in verse 34, in verse 35, we read about the violence of the crowd. Verse 36, the mob of people. All of that coming from the same word, this aklos word that we have. And then we have two other words that get used through that too. In verse 30, all the city. In verse 34, the uproar that's coming from the crowd, or the clamor that is coming from the crowd. All of these things are describing the circumstances around Paul. And it seems at first glance that his enemy is this crowd or this mob. I got to tell you that one of the things we do at our house, when we're talking about decisions and we're talking about calendars and we're talking about what we're going to do this day or this month or that month, or what we're going to participate in financially, all of these things, one of the things we talk about quite a bit is what seems to be going on around, what the popular thing is to do. And I am so often the last to get on board with any kind of trend or with any kind of fad that is happening around us. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we look at what's going on, and if it seems like everyone is doing it, that in our Christian walk and in our way of being discipled, we think we ought to pause. We think we ought to not be so quick to jump into it, because it could be what Paul says in Romans 12, a pattern of the world. I like what John says in his first epistle. In chapter 2, he says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life, it is not from the Father, but from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever." Maybe today or this week or this month, you need to pause and look and observe what all the crowds are doing. What seems to be the most popular thing, and is it possible that God is willing for you something that is directly counter to that? Just pause before you jump into what the patterns look like around you. Have a discussion with someone about that, think about that, and see how that applies to Paul and his life right here, and a really cool thing that's going to happen tomorrow when you continue on with the text. You all have a great day, and God bless.